Welcome to another deep dive with us. We're going to be looking into an unsettling case today, the case of Joseph Nesenson, a serial killer whose crimes they actually spanned across the U.S. And we've got a lot to unpack here: court records, news articles, even some firsthand accounts.
Yeah, it's going to be a really perplexing case for sure. Our goal today is, I think, to understand not just what he did, but why. How did he manage to evade capture for so long? What can we learn from this story?
Well, let's start with what we know about his early life, which is not much. He was born in 1950, but the details are really scarce.
Yeah, that's definitely a red flag, right? This lack of information. I mean, it makes you think that he was able to just blend in, fly under the radar, appear perfectly ordinary, which is honestly a chilling thought.
Right, it is, but one detail stands out that we know of, and that's that he worked as a truck driver. Think about that constant access to highways crossing state lines. Could this have played a role in his crimes?
I think it's a crucial piece of the puzzle for sure. Truck driving allows for such a transient lifestyle, always moving around. It makes it so difficult to track movements and even harder to connect potential victims in different locations.
So that seemingly mundane job could have been a perfect cover for his dark deeds. And the story takes a grim turn in 1990 with his arrest for the murder of Sally Joe Tsigaris. And the most shocking part, the key witness against him was his own wife, Cheryl Rose.
Yeah, Cheryl's testimony offers a really disturbing glimpse into Nissenson's world, and it was filled with, drug use, BDSM practices. These elements would ultimately factor into Tsigaris's murder.
So what happened? Paint us a picture.
Okay, so Nissenson met Tsigaris, who was a prostitute, and he invited her back to his truck where he kept BDSM equipment. They both took a large amount of meth, and, well, that's when things spiraled out of control. Cheryl actually recounts Nissenson torturing and humiliating Tsigaris, ultimately leading to her death.
Wow. That level of brutality is just unimaginable. And to think Cheryl herself was involved in the drug use, right? That makes her a pretty complicated character.
Yeah, it definitely raises questions about her reliability as a witness, something that the defense would later focus on. But it's a common thread in these types of cases. Can you truly trust someone so deeply entwined with the perpetrator?
Right, but despite those questions swirling around Cheryl's testimony, Nissenson was convicted and sentenced to 25 years for Tsigaris's murder. You would think that would be the end of it, but it was just the beginning.
Yeah. While Nissenson was behind bars, Cheryl, she dropped a bombshell. She claimed that this wasn't an isolated incident and alleged that he could be responsible for multiple other murders.
Hold on, so there could be more victims out there? This is getting really heavy.
Yeah, this is where the case takes a major turn. We're no longer dealing with a single murder, but a potential pattern of violence. The entire investigation shifts at that point.
So who were these other potential victims?
Well, Cheryl specifically mentioned the murder of Kathy Graves in California, and then there were claims of 2 murders in Oklahoma and 1 in Nevada. But what's really striking is the gap between these allegations and the actual charges being filed. It wasn't until 2008, almost 2 decades later, that Nissenson faced formal charges for these additional murders.
Wow. 2 decades. What caused that delay?
Well, investigating these claims, it takes an immense amount of time. You need corroborating witnesses, physical evidence, meticulous detective work. These cases can often take years, even decades, to fully unfold.
And all this time, Nissenson was up for parole. That's unsettling.
Right, but once these new accusations surfaced, he was transferred to a different jail, awaiting extradition to California. And get this, he even tried to represent himself in court.
Wait, he wanted to be his own lawyer? That's a bold move, especially for someone facing such serious charges. What does that tell us about him?
It's a fascinating glimpse into his personality, for sure. Was it arrogance, desperation, maybe a deep distrust of anyone else? Whatever the reason, it definitely adds another layer of intrigue to the case.
And just when you thought things couldn't get more complex in 2008, he was hit with 2 more murder charges: 13-year-old Tammy Lynn Jarski and 14-year-old Tanja Jones. This is heartbreaking.
Yeah, and it significantly changes the timeline as well. These murders happened in 1981, pushing his criminal activity back much further than initially suspected. It suggests a long, disturbing pattern of predatory behavior.
What do we know about these 2 victims?
So these young girls, they disappear from a foster home and were later found in a wooded area. It's a grim reminder of the vulnerability of children, especially those in the foster care system. One of the bodies was even found tied to a tree with electrical wire. A detail that just speaks volumes about the brutality and calculated nature of these crimes.
And there was a key witness in this case, right? Jesse Prieto, Nissenson's best friend.
Yes, Prieto's testimony is crucial here. He claimed that he and Nissenson picked up the girls, gave them alcohol and drugs, and then drove them to a wooded area where they were beaten, raped, and strangled. This testimony was incredibly damning, even though Prieto had already passed away by the time the trial began.
But how could his testimony be used if he was deceased? Doesn't that bring up legal issues?
Absolutely. It introduces the concept of hearsay, which essentially means using someone's out-of-court statements as evidence. Think of it like this. You're trying to convince a friend that a movie is great based on what someone else told you, but that person isn't there to back up their claims. It's a tricky situation, right?
Definitely. So the court had to determine if Prieto's statements were reliable enough to be used as evidence. This adds a whole new layer of complexity to the case.
Exactly. The court had to grapple with the reliability of this testimony, which could be a really slippery slope legally. It's a fascinating look into the complexities of the judicial system.
So let's move on to the trial itself. It took place in 2013, and by this point, both Prieto and Cheryl were deceased. What a challenge for the prosecution, right? Trying to build a case around the words of people who could no longer be questioned directly.
It was a significant hurdle for sure. Imagine trying to piece together a puzzle with some of the most crucial pieces missing. The prosecution had to rely heavily on hearsay testimony, which, as we discussed, has its own set of legal challenges.
They had to convince the jury that these accounts, even though they were coming from people who were no longer alive, that they were accurate and reliable. That couldn't have been easy.
No, not at all. And Cheryl's testimony in particular, it was scrutinized really heavily. There were inconsistencies in her accounts over the years. For example, she changed her story about the murder of Kathy Graves multiple times, which obviously raised red flags for the defense.
So the defense was basically arguing that without any physical evidence directly linking Nisensen to these crimes, Cheryl's words couldn't be trusted. Did they suggest she had a reason to lie or embellish the truth?
Oh, absolutely. They questioned her motivation. Was she seeking revenge? Was she trying to protect herself? These are all valid questions that the jury had to consider. It really makes you think about the weight of someone's words, especially in such a high-stakes situation.
And here's the thing that really blows my mind. Despite all of those challenges, despite the reliance on hearsay and the inconsistencies in Cheryl's testimony, Nisensen was found guilty on 3 counts of murder: Sally Jo Segaris, Tammy Lynn Jarchta, and Tanja Jones. What do you think convinced the jury?
It's a question that legal experts still debate today. Even with the lack of physical evidence, something about the testimonies, the circumstances, the overall pattern of Nisensen's behavior must have resonated with the jury. Maybe they saw a clear picture of guilt emerge, even with some missing pieces of the puzzle.
It's almost like they could sense the truth, even if it wasn't perfectly clear-cut. It makes you wonder what might have happened if he hadn't been caught for Segaris' murder. Would those other murders have remained unsolved? Would he have continued preying on innocent people?
It's a chilling thought. It's possible those other murders might have gone unnoticed, which highlights the importance of that initial arrest. Sometimes one case can be the key to unlocking a much larger network of crimes.
So in a way, Sally Jo Segaris' case, tragic as it was, might have prevented other tragedies from happening.
It's a possibility we can't ignore. And as of 2023, Nisensen is on death row in San Quentin State Prison. It's the final chapter of a long and twisted story, but it doesn't answer all the questions, does it?
Not at all. There are still so many lingering questions. How many other victims might be out there? What factors contributed to his descent into violence? And what can we learn from his case to prevent future tragedies?
It really underscores the complexity of these cases. We try to find answers, seek justice, but there are always going to be gaps, unanswered questions. And that ambiguity can be unsettling.
Speaking of ambiguity, I keep going back to Cheryl's involvement. It's hard to figure her out. Was she a victim manipulated by a dangerous man? Or was she a willing participant in his crimes? Or maybe, and this is probably the most likely scenario, a bit of both.
It's a natural human tendency to try and categorize people as good or evil, but the reality is often much more nuanced. Cheryl's story is undeniably tragic, regardless of her level of culpability. She was entangled in the web of addiction and violence, and her testimony, while flawed, ultimately played a crucial role in bringing Nisensen to justice.
I find myself wondering what went through her mind when she decided to come forward. What was her motivation? Was it guilt? Fear? A desire for redemption? We may never know for sure.
That's the thing about true crime. We often encounter this kind of ambiguity. We try to put all the pieces together, but we're left with gaps, questions that might never have definitive answers.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the case of Joseph Nisensen, what stands out to you the most? What are the key takeaways for you?
For me, it's a stark reminder of the importance of vigilance. Nisensen's case shows how easily a seemingly ordinary life can conceal a dark underbelly. It also highlights the challenges of relying on hearsay testimony, especially when dealing with complex and potentially unreliable witnesses.
And the sheer randomness of it all is unsettling. These victims were in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing paths with a predator who took advantage of their vulnerability. It's a sobering reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places.
It also emphasizes the vital role of law enforcement and the importance of persistent investigation. Remember, it took years, even decades, to uncover the full scope of Nisensen's crimes. It's a testament to the fact that the pursuit of justice can be a long and demanding process.
Absolutely. And here's a final thought for our listeners to ponder. Imagine if there had been just one more piece of evidence, one more witness that could have definitively linked Nissenson to those additional murders in Oklahoma and Nevada. Would those cases have been pursued more aggressively? Would he have faced even more charges? Or would they have remained unsolved mysteries forever?
That's a haunting question, isn't it? It highlights how fragile evidence can be, how chance plays a role in criminal investigations, and ultimately that some truths may remain elusive even when we're faced with overwhelming evidence of guilt.
It really makes you think about the ripple effects of these kinds of crimes, not just on the victims and their families, but on the entire community.
And on the investigators who dedicate their lives to seeking justice, imagine the emotional toll of carrying these cases, of knowing the details, of seeing the darkest parts of human nature.
It's a heavy burden to carry, knowing the depths of these crimes and still having to search for answers. It's a lot to think about for sure. But it also makes you think about like the resilience of the human spirit, right? Despite the horrors that these investigators must see, they continue to fight for the truth for the victims for a sense of closure.
Right. It really is amazing. And I think while we may be captivated by the true crime element of cases like Nissenson's, it's crucial to remember the real people at the heart of these headlines. People who suffered, who lost loved ones, and who are still grappling with the aftermath to this day.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the puzzle of it, all the intrigue and the investigation, but we can't forget the human cost of these events.
Absolutely. As we conclude our deep dive today, I think it's important to reflect on that human cost, the lives cut short, the families shattered, and the scars that remain long after the news cycle moves on.
It's a stark reminder that while we search for answers and understanding, sometimes the most important thing is simply acknowledging the pain, the loss, and the lasting impact of these crimes.
And to honor the victims. By remembering their stories, by continuing to push for justice, and by striving to create a world where such tragedies are less likely to occur.
Well said. On that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the unsettling case of Joseph Nissenson. I hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and a reminder of the complexities of the human experience.
It's always a privilege to explore these multifaceted cases with you. And to our listener, thank you for joining us on this journey. The world of true crime is full of twists and turns, but it also offers a glimpse into the human condition and all its intricacies and contradictions.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.